All right, so we have one last couple of speakers today from Index Exchange and Time. One thing I think it's important to say is that header bidding and the evolution of header bidding is really perhaps the most disruptive technology in the publishing side. And for all you brands that are in the room, the reason why this is important for you all is to gain a little bit more insight into the tech tax that proliferates the programmatic space. And I think one of the things which has been fantastic about what Index has done has really been to change that dynamic and become a lot more transparent on the fee structure. And with that, I would like to invite my good friend Andrew Casale and Barbara Agus to the floor. So please come on up. Welcome. A big round of applause for the two of them.
Thank you, Jay. And thanks to all of you for sticking it out. It's the last session of the day. It's been a long day. It's been a great day. But we're going to hopefully liven it up with a little header bidding chatter. I'm Andrew Casale, President and CEO of Index Exchange. And certainly, header bidding has been a big part of our last 2 years, and particularly the disruption in the supply chain of ad tech.
Buonasera a tutti, I'm Barbara, I work for Time Inc. And I work for the international division. And I would like first of all to say thanks to Andrew to give me the opportunity to be here with him today to discuss about a very hot topic in the programmatic landscape. And Andrew is definitely one of the most expert person that, it might be very interesting to...
Too kind. We're going to try to do a bit of an interactive fireside chat. So rather than me just peppering Barbara with questions, which might not be too fun, we're going to go back and forth and hopefully have a little fun with this. And certainly to kick it off, rather than getting right into the technical dynamics of header bidding, I really want to start at the why, because this trend was started for a reason, and it really was because of a general dynamic that was playing out in our ecosystem. When I saw Dan present the Pokemon Go video, I kind of thought of header bidding, because in this weird little way, it's been this insane rush to technology that we haven't really seen before in ad tech in a long time. Ad tech talks about a lot of technology, but rarely adopts so fast, and we've certainly seen that in this case. So maybe just to go before this trend, like Barbara, from a media company publisher perspective, how was the landscape prior to this rise in transparency?
Let me start my introduction with a Latin locution that I really like because I think it's quite interesting of representing what's happening today in programmatic landscape. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon River in 49 IC, he said, "Alea iacta est." The dice has been thrown. This means decision has been taken, we cannot return. It's the same in kind of what's happening today with the digital landscape. We started to introduce some sort of automation in the buying, selling of advertiser, and I cannot imagine myself today to come back to a stage where we don't have any type of automation. Now, the question is, automation is good or bad for the market? And if we look at the news that we have read on the press recently, it seems to be a kind of, skepticism around what advertiser can do through automation. It seems that most of the aspect where automation is failing is to guarantee enough brand safety, quality, that was something easier to control when we were in the direct relationship in the old system where we know exactly where the ads was displayed. Today, we might partner with tech partners that might have 3 million of a URL. How can you check where your ad is going to be exactly displayed? And that's probably one of the issues we had recently. Automation is here to help, but we need to understand how does it work to avoid issues.
Yeah, well, I like to look at the beginning of programmatic. Like if you look at what's been in the trades, particularly in the mainstream trades recently, you can blame programmatic for a lot of the slip-ups. There's been a lot of examples of automation gone wrong. And if you go back a decade to the beginning of our ecosystem, the ad exchange, the programmatic world that we live in today, we actually started by trying to sell media that no one wanted to buy. This entire ecosystem started in remnant. So we were effectively at the absolute bottom of something that we call the waterfall, trying to sell what remained. And if you think of how far we've come today, we've moved from an environment where we were trying to use this technology to sell what no one wanted to a technology now that major publishers and major brands are using to transact. And so it's a bit of a huge shift that's taken place in the usage of this tech, but yet some of those remnants of the past still exist. And when you think of it from the lens of a major media company like Time Inc., if the ecosystem, if the technology started with remnant inventory and inventory that nobody necessarily really wanted to buy, it's been a bit of a difficult transition to make when you now bring a premium brand into the mix. So like how has that transition been for you guys, and how do you think about some of these trust issues as such a marquee brand?
Well, first of all, I mean, as you can see, we have a lot of brands. Each one has got a different policy when it comes in terms of advertising you want to host there. It's different in terms of technology behind each digital website. So, of course, even the approach to automation is different. We have still some of our brands who doesn't want to work with programmatic at all, and they don't, in my opinion, here is the issue. They haven't realized yet the programmatic, in the meantime, is moving away from what was purely real-time bidding. When we first started, I mean, we monetized Remnant because Remnant was what we get back from ad network. But as soon as we started to deal with real-time bidding, we had to learn how to implement passback, tags, floor prices. Then we had to start to play with the ad server, and then suddenly we realized that there was a kind of lack of education even on our side, how the yield works. So we had to experiment. We started to realize that we were leaving money on the plate. We become expert ourselves to say, no, I feel confident with the technology. I want more. I don't want, just limited to Remnant. I think technology is good to help me with brand and premium campaign. Let's open to data. Let's open to top of the funnel of the advertising. And that's what is happening today.
So you can kind of rationalize it as the then was this waterfall. It's a bit of an ad tech term, but effectively it refers to this idea that when a media company is looking to maximize the yield of their media, they start with their most prized asset, which is generally a sponsorship campaign that is typically booked with a direct insertion order, paper, and a manual ad ops process. And that'll filter through and filter down to the various avenues that are available subsequent to that. Maybe something that's not sponsorship, but still direct sold, eventually getting down into where programmatic would live, which would usually be a stagger of platforms. And so if you really think about that for a second, if you're trying to sell a premium high-impact execution with a visual like this where premium would infer the top and you're selling at the bottom, that's not actually the best way for you to be able to convey the value of your brand. And I think that was what hindered the earlier form of programmatic, where we were talking about private marketplaces, we were talking about doing deals, getting marketers to work with publishers, but then we were selling impressions at the bottom of this picture. So no matter how good that deal was and how good that conversation was, you were always held back by virtue of the fact that the waterfall prevented the best impressions from making it to the marketer. Any other color you'd add?
Well, waterfall was also preventing us from understanding which is the real value of our inventory because, we couldn't see how the brands are happy to pay for every single impression. So we basically, again, leaving money on the table because we weren't able to understand how valuable is my inventory for certain type of buyers. And that's why I think that their bidding has been a kind of natural consequence and the wrapper with their bidding in a way that, we were demanding more transparency because there was some issue around the trust. We suddenly discovered that some of the partners we choose to partner with were not necessarily making our best interest. So we as an industry were starting to push tech company to give us the technology we want, and that's the direction where we are going today.
So if you also take, if we think of now this rise of header bidding and what drove it, certainly the deficiencies in being able to sell a premium deal to an agency or a marketer was hugely impacted by the visual behind me. The other one was this whole idea of this ad tech tax. So it was this idea of saying, when I spend $1 with a manual contract, I knew the dollar went from me, the agency or marketer, directly to the media company. As soon as we went through some of the technologies in the picture behind me, and we started to put that dollar through this waterfall, what we knew for certain was that at the end of the waterfall, it didn't look like $1. And in often cases, it looked nothing remotely close to $1, which started this trend around the ad tech tax. And a lot of questions. Where's the money going? So we know that the agency is typically using a DSP or a platform to conduct the buy. We know that bids into an exchange that a publisher would typically use either directly or via an SSP. So we kind of know the players in the middle, but we didn't know where the dollar was going because a lot of the transactions were fundamentally opaque. And that was a huge source of concern as well.
Of course, and we see also recently in the news some of the publishers taking back in control or even the budget they're receiving, questioning how does it work, the technology, how each partner is operating. And that's when you realize that it becomes really important to start to have an open conversation with every single player in the market. We want to have a global exchange, we want a transparent ecosystem, but what is missing at the basement, in my opinion, is trust versus each other. Mm-hmm. So we saw, for example, even the header bidding system with a tech company that might have an open approach and other ones that starts to create the barriers where we, publisher and brands, want to be able to operate with.
Right. So we now flash forward to where we're at today, and we've effectively just eliminated that waterfall entirely. So the idea today now is open everything up, make every impression available to platforms. So whether the transaction will ultimately be fulfilled through that paper contract, through a sponsorship, or through a platform, the first change was kill the waterfall, open it all to everyone. The opening it all also meant open every format and variety of execution to platforms, which was another hindrance of the past. What we used to do in the waterfall was send static sizes to a DSP. So effectively that meant that there was no real creative opportunity in programmatic because you could only fulfill what that static box created. By opening everything up now, we can do anything that a page can do. But the most interesting change of all to the trend was this idea of removing a single vendor from control. So media companies historically would use one SSP or one primary SSP. They would house the majority of their programmatic inventory, and they were given a whole lot of trust. The assumption was by working with that one vendor, you would maximize your results. What ended up happening, and what certainly leaked into the trades more recently, is a variety of interesting business models were created within the SSP to find a way to keep more of the dollar inside of the platform. So, you could see $1,000 hit the SSP, media company might expect 90% of that revenue to go to it, but as it turns out, maybe $700 or $600 was actually making it to the other side of the transaction. And that's come up because it was really hard to audit the old way. So now we've opened it all up, everything is sort of, transparent by virtue of the technology change. How has that changed your business?
Well, I would say one thing, that time is the right approach to programmatic technology, because it's only when the technology or the latest release starts to be widely adopted that we as an industry starts to understand the drawbacks of the technology as well, because unfortunately it's not always easy step. As I said, some of the changes we are applying today are forcing publisher like us to rethink completely, not just the commercial strategy, but start to questioning how we're going to work efficiently with programmatic. How can we make a streamlined process through an efficient ecosystem that is not made just of a commercial relationship? You need to have a conversation with the CTO of your company. You need to figure out if any kind of change you are making is actually having an impact on the cost of the hardware you are using, because otherwise, you basically cannibalize the money you are making on one channel. And then it means also to have more complexity in terms that, for example, the latest things we saw in programmatic are opening questions for trust in terms of fraud, viewability, other quality traffic. So the point is, if we want to be very successful in this technology, we also need to start to understand what's happened if we move from a waterfall to header bidding, and we start to discover we had latency issue.
Sure.
How could we fix the latency issue together with that tech complexity of integrating so many partners or create 1,000 online items to catch up every single point? And then this brings also to an additional question. Now, as an SSP, you don't have anymore your position in the ad stack, in the waterfall, as one of your unique selling proposition to say you need to work with me rather than somebody else. This also means that you need to find a different way to positioning yourself versus the competition. And the answer for me in this case means, what can I do to support you as a publisher to reach the technical expertise you need to make the technology working at its best?
I'm going to turn that into 3 questions because I think those are some really interesting points. So, just starting with the first one, it reminds me of the session on the main stage earlier today from the spokesman from VW. One of the points he made was, if you're using technology and it creates 50% more efficiency, but it costs 50% of your dollar, what's the point? Is it really doing anything? And that's, I think, one of the tough questions that's being asked of ad tech right now. What efficiency are you driving? What value are you driving for what you cost? And I think if you take that dollar and trace it from marketer to pub and look at what happens to it, in many equations, I think a lot of people are asking themselves, was the technology actually adding more efficiency than its cost? And I think in many cases, the answer is no. In certain cases, and I think what we're pushing for is the answer to be invariably yes, but I don't think we're there yet. So I think that's a really important point. And I think it's a point that not only are media companies asking out of necessity, because if the dollar isn't making it to them, that's going to create an unsustainable economic environment for their businesses. But marketers are asking the same question because it's working media. At the end of the day, if your working media dollar becomes reduced to a third, you're not going to have a very high share of voice, and your KPIs might suffer. So I think that's a really important point. Latency is another really important point that Header has sort of erupted around. It didn't used to matter what your investment in infrastructure was in ad tech historically, because there was no judgment. We all know that ads have historically been slow, sometimes fast. There's a general lack of happiness on the consumer side with the ad experience. But no one's been held to any account to this point because the technology hasn't required it. As soon as you fire an ad tag or an ad server, it can take as long as it wants. No one is actually monitoring those numbers. With header bidding, there is no tolerance for latency, which means now every ad tech company that has to participate has to be very fast. It's completely changed the equation. And I think we've certainly seen not everybody makes the cut. Not every ad tech company has actually made the infrastructure investments to create the correct experience, and Header's exposed that. And the last point you made, which I think was the most important, and now I've kind of lost it. Do you remember what you said?
So we were talking about latency, quality, and the importance to collaborate amongst CTO,
yes.
ad ops,
that's really cool.
salespeople.
So the other really cool thing that's happened is it used to be when an ad tech company would work with a publisher, and certainly the same case on the buy side, we would work directly with a programmatic team. We would work with a one-to-one stakeholder. Now we have the CTO in the conversation, the CIO in the conversation, the financial team in the conversation. It's totally changed. People are reevaluating the way they're running their programmatic businesses, because fundamentally I think it's just been something that's lacked oversight for a while, because for the longest time it was a rounding error. But there's a bit of a reset happening as well, which has been really interesting. A lot of new voices and faces in the room that were never there before.
And that's what you realize when you actually have to run programmatically, not in theory, but on a day by day, how many decision makers are involved in the decision. They are actually slowing down the process to take a decision, and that's where it emerged the probably biggest contradiction when you are a legacy publisher. They're trying to move fast into digital, and you realize that the structure you have internally needs to be suddenly modified. But you also realize that the technology we have is so complex that you cannot just switch off overnight to accommodate what are the latest trends of the industry. So you have to find the right balance between being able to work, keep continuity with the past, because of course, as we said, if we do not understand the technology, we cannot simply switch to the new technology. That might be even worse than what we were able to achieve before. So that's when I say this is especially important. For example, we come back to the programmatic sales. And when you look at the ecosystem of how agency and publisher are talking about doing programmatic today, sometimes we have still agency that comes to me and they're telling me what they want, and what they want is a better priority in the ad server. They want to make with me a PMP because that's the way they know how to do business, and that's even how companies like us have approached the programmatic business. Let's build up a team of salespeople just focus on PMP.
Yeah.
Does it make sense to have a structure like that we just started to build up 2 years ago, when now we're moving into automated guaranteed real-time audience? header bidding, where priority in the waterfall is not so relevant as it was before, then this is bring also to think about how I'm going to change my sales approach when I talk to brand, when I talk to clients. What does it mean to do a PMP in a header bidding time? It's the same of what we were doing 2-3 years ago. We were still starting to, work with automation.
It's a really good point. Just a quick poll of the audience. Who in the audience is on the buy side, marketer, agency, or anyone there? Okay, fairly good number. So priority has really become a fascinating new paradigm that the header has surfaced. And like, priority to a marketer probably doesn't mean much. It's an ad server dynamic, but it actually matters a ton. So if you think of the old waterfall that I had behind me, price is not the only determinant in the result. So imagine you have a very scarce audience. You've got your audience mapped out precisely. You know who you want to buy. Maybe you're super sophisticated and you know that there's a very small pool of potential intenders, and that is what's most desirable. And you're willing to pay a lot, so you bid a lot through your DSP. That does not in any way assure you that you'll actually be able to reach the entirety of that universe, even if you're the #1 bidder at the highest price. Because certain events in the ad server can actually trump price. That's where priority comes in. And one thing that we've started to learn on the buy side is a new metric that was never there before that's actually incredibly relevant, is win rate. So it's the idea of saying, as a buyer, you've put an incredible investment into a DMP audience strategy. You've embraced programmatic because it's data-driven buying. You know who you want. Compare your attainment of that audience vis-a-vis your ability to win that audience on an impression basis to the number of bids you're placing. If your win rate's incredibly high, it means that you're satisfying the opportunity as far as you can. You've maxed out audience. What we often find is that win rates are typically pretty low. And what that usually means is that you're not running into a price problem, you're running into a priority problem. And priority is actually becoming a new criteria that it feels like the correct version of private marketplaces or deals between marketer and buyer are starting to incorporate. And it also feels like the old style of PMP, which was let's set up 100 and hope a few of them work, is starting to go away.
100, you're lucky. Sometimes we have 1,000.
Yeah, there you go.
The reality is quite different.
Yeah.
And then when you try to analyze, you realize why having so many PMP is actually became a problem. Again, the theory versus the practical day-by-day practice of running a programmatic. Set up a deal still take time.
Right.
And it's the opposite of being automated. Actually, it's very, very manual process. And it reminds me, actually, what I call PMP is just the new version of the old insertion order in a direct integration, So if we have so many PMP, how can we actually reach a point in which they become useful for us because we are quick to analyze them, quick to understand what's not working, which kind of information we can get back from a PMP. So as you said, win rate is important, but if you're not winning, there is a problem. There might be even with a kind of, there is a response, so it means my audience is there. Why you are not buying? What people do not realize is not me and you who wants to transact. There is an algorithm between me and you. There is a tech process, but I can go around the tech process using this knowledge to send my sales team to the agency and say, look, my audience is here. For some reason, it's not working. Let's set up an automated guaranteed deal. Let's be back to, the old-fashioned way to do business in a way that we still can enrich the transaction from the data, from the machine learning, from the efficiency we have learned through the years running with, real-time audience data. We didn't have them before.
So how are the conversations with buyers changing in this new environment where you can now expose all impressions to the market, all those creative opportunities as well, but yet that old style of buying and perhaps that old psychology has to still change?
Well, we saw some of the partners, especially when it comes to header bidding a wrapper, they are starting to be put in a wrapper but to have a kind of direct integration with us. They want to kept away from the real-time bidding protocol.
Right.
They want to work using machine learning. They want to use the algorithm efficiency. They don't like the real-time bidding process because it's harder to budget, it's harder to plan, it's harder to, establish how many revenue I'm going to be able to make. We also saw a situation in which sometimes we saw many brands investing more in PMP, but that's not additional incremental budget coming to my pipes. It's simply the way in which the agency works today, or in which it's easier for them budgeting the campaign. But if I have to create, if I'm moving away budget from the open auction to move into the PMP and it's not incremental budget, that's not what I want. Because you're forcing me to introduce, again, manuality in a process that I want to be easily automated.
Yeah, we've actually unpacked that. It's a worthwhile exercise if you haven't. Like if you're on the buy side and you have hundreds or 1,000 private marketplaces set up. A few buyers that we've been working closely with to do a bunch of A/B testing, we've encouraged to just turn them all off. Turn it off, just for a day or a week or something. Just literally turn them off and compare your results. And one of the things that we find through that is the vast majority of that manual work and those deals don't do much. If you use a trusted pipe and don't use the 100 exchanges that exist in the market, but use those that you know and trust, and pivot to a whitelist, you effectively create the same results without any of the manual effort of a deal. So then it becomes, why do we use deals? Well, deals should be used because there's an actual reason. To Barb's point, if it's a reallocation of spend that was going to hit open anyway, there's nothing really unique there. Why are you using the deal? Oftentimes it's to direct to a safe environment. There are other ways to do that. To us, we think, unless there's something added on, like priority, so the idea there is the deal has an implied priority above the open market, therefore it trumps price, deals don't really make a whole lot of sense anymore. There's been a huge, I think, change in a short span of time in the programmatic market.
And they make sense if they're going to be guaranteed the revenue for the publisher.
Sure, which they rarely do.
I'm not going to refuse this kind of deal.
Right, yeah, those are the deals that are productive, though. Unfortunately, the vast majority don't do that.
I know, but that's again because there is a, deal might be an answer to brand safety issues.
Right.
You want control where my ad is going to be displayed, then yes, you need to implement a deal. But actually, we see the quality in general of open auction increasing considerably compared to the past.
Right.
We also see that it really depends on the KPI of your campaign. Sometimes using a brand safety environment drives better engagement. We run some tests with Mott, and we can definitely guarantee this to the advertiser. Mm-hmm. But if your KPI is to get a direct response, then you need the long tail traffic coming, from jinglebell.com. Because this is what learns and feeds the algorithms with the information they need to be able to become valuable, efficient.
Well, there's been an incredible number of stats to that effect. There was Chase, poor intern, took 400,000 sites down to 5,000 sites. Results didn't change. Magna released some data. 80% of their spend hits 1% of the publishers in programmatic. So this whole idea of the long tail being a part of programmatic or being a part of the brand dimension of programmatic, I think is going away. It's too risky. You might get some incrementality, but at great risk to potentially be in the mainstream or hit the front page of a newspaper, and then whatever additional incrementality you got was probably eroded by the potential impact to your brand. So it does feel like that change is upon us. I realize that we're close to time, so maybe questions or...
We're supposed to
I think
leave.
we got 3 minutes, so any questions from the audience?
I cannot see. Oh, okay.
I like how the lights pivot. It's like all on you guys.
We should have had this light all the time, I think.
No questions? Come on, header tag bidding. It is incredibly disruptive. But I think you guys covered it pretty well.
I have a question.
Everyone's ready for
Yeah,
drinks.
you have a question.
Yes.
Go for it.
Andrew, all the programmatic we were working today is around the desktop environment.
Right.
And now we're approaching the year of mobile, where we have less cookie. This means lowest cookie sync match rate. Mm-hmm. That's how you define. So how the tech partners are thinking to support us once we start to move away from the concept of the cookie?
I'd say that we already have. I think to me, it sort of looks like this. We have two options: either a very, very small number of companies, the duopoly of everyone's sites, will control identity for everyone, for the entire ecosystem, or we need to find a way to pivot to people-based buying, which it solves the mobile problem, it solves the cross-device problem, and it also solves, quite frankly, a crisis, or an eventual crisis that's kind of upon us all. Identity should not just be controlled by two companies. And so to me, that takes collaboration. What we've kind of realized working with publishers and media companies is that no one has the scale of identity of the few, but collectively, everyone has enough in a fragmented way that if you were to combine it and kind of create identity for the rest of the web, you could actually achieve very close parity scale to the Titans.
Or bigger.
So to me, I do believe that identity is the solution to mobile. And I do think that there's a lot of interesting collaborative efforts underway, not just on the tech side and the kind of the core plumbing, but also on the collaboration side with media companies to say, we might not all reach 100, and we might not all have state and identity on 100% of the audience, but if we have our 5 and you have your 5 and you've got your 3 and we put it all together, we can probably assume the same people-based buying model that these huge platforms have and do so with a whole lot of control and unshackle identity from the few. So I think that's the key. That's our focus.
Yeah, and actually to that point, I mean, one of the interesting things, if you look at Germany, for example, with eMetric, all the publishers working in collaboration with Deutsche Telekom to create essentially a massive universe in that market for true identity management. So yeah, we see this from all the telcos in pretty much every market wanting to essentially be the foundation for that. So great. Any other questions from the audience? Perfect. So let's give a round of applause to Babs and Andrew.